Everyone. Welcome everyone to our fourth hearing of the year. Today we are going to examine gun violence prevention and enforcement efforts. There's an epidemic of gun violence in our nation, and this subcommittee has a key role to play in the urgently needed response. As we oversee the federal law enforcement agencies tasked with overseeing gun dealers, investigating gun crimes, and running our background check system, among other things. That is why I'm pleased to welcome our two witnesses today. Thomas Brandon, the Deputy Director and Head of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive, also known as ATF, and Christine Halverson, the Acting Assistant Director for Criminal Justice Information Services, or CJIS, pronounced CJIS, at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. CJIS, among other things, operates the National Instant Criminal Background Check, more commonly known as NICS, pronounced as NICS. Both agencies play a crucial role in preventing gun crimes before they occur, the investigating them once they do. You also have a key role in the policy making and the public to better understand how guns fall into wrong hands, how our government oversees our nation's firearms, dealers and buyers, and what we need to prioritize. Both agencies also have a key role in working with state and local enforcement in these goals. There are a large number of issues that have raised concerns on both sides of the aisle in recent years, from oversight over federally licensed gun dealers to loopholes in our background check system, to delayed denials, to gun trafficking, to the need to more rapidly trace the sources of crime guns. The list goes on and on. Unfortunately, we in Congress have too often failed just as well. Given the diversity and seriousness of your missions, we have too often underfunded some of your critical functions. Right now, for instance, the New York City Police Department has more than 39,000 officers and more than 19,000 administrative staff. As of 2019, the ATF has a total of 5,109. Given your responsibilities, I think it is safe to say that an increase in staffing is sorely needed. On the NICS side, funding has grown over time to help states maintain and update their background check databases, and continued NICS funding is vital to ensuring that the background check database is accurate. Lastly, we also cannot discuss enforcement of our gun laws without also mentioning previous legislative actions taken by Congress that have impeded ATF's ability to prevent and investigate gun violence. This committee, unfortunately, has a long history of interfering in some common sense policies to ensure that the ATF can act in ways that are effective and efficient. Hopefully we will get a chance to discuss the impact of those choices today. I represent a community that is far too often subject to gun violence, like so many members do, not only in this committee but in Congress. We are not far from the issue of illegal guns that have moved from a legitimate federally licensed firearms dealer to an illegitimate source. So far this year, we have had 29 shootings in the Bronx. I think we can all agree that this is too many and that we need to act to prevent this from happening. Gun crimes happen all over our nation, and not a day goes by without a firearms-related death. This violence has a serious impact on our neighborhoods, not only the serious physical and emotional impact on families, but also the psychological impact on the broader community at large. 2 weeks ago, the House took a step toward addressing this epidemic. I look forward to working with the agencies here today to determine what steps we can take next. So we welcome you again, and with that, I recognize Mr. Adderholt, my partner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding, and I'd like to welcome our two witnesses to the hearing this morning. It's good to have you here this morning. The primary criminal enforcement mission of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive is to protect the public from violent crimes. Similarly, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's predominant mission is to protect the American public from dangerous criminal threats. As such, Director Haverson and Deputy Director Brandon, I know that you're both experts on the topic of violent crime and public safety, and so that's why we certainly welcome your presence here to the subcommittee this morning. I look forward to your insights and learning more about the comprehensive efforts that are underway at your respective agencies to better understand crime trends and modernize our nation's efforts to respond to them. The complexity of violence and the very nature of criminal behavior, as was just mentioned in the chairman's remarks, make predicting and preventing incidents of violence extremely difficult. For this reason, I deeply appreciate the extraordinary efforts of your agencies to work with your federal, state, and local partners to address the violent misuse of firearms with the help of advanced technology, the improved intelligence, better coordination, and targeted training and also enforcement. All too often, as the case, some in Washington and members of the media want to blame the presence of guns for acts of violence and use tragedy as the very reason to restrict fundamental rights to bear arms. I believe the Founding Fathers wisely included the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights, and this fundamental freedom protects the right of gun owners and in turn restrains the presence of criminal activity and tyranny. I firmly believe that restricting the rights of gun owners is not the answer to the issues that we've seen and to the criminal misuse of firearms in general. So with that, I thank the chairman for holding this important hearing, and I yield back and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Director Brandon, time for your opening remarks. Please try to keep your statement to 5 minutes, and as always, your full statement will be inserted in the record.
Sir. Well, Chairman Serrano and Ranking Member Adderholt and members of the committee, my name is Thomas Brandon, and I serve as the Deputy Director for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, Explosives, known as ATF. As head of the agency, representing the men and women of ATF, and thank you for your invitation to appear before you today in order to address ATF's role in combating gun violence. The plague of gun violence has enormous impact across America, from Charleston to Pittsburgh, from Columbine to Parkland, and throughout our nation. Whether you live in a big city or a rural community, whether it is our children in schools, adults at work, or families attending religious services, no one is immune to the impact. While a mass shooting captures the attention of the nightly news, the daily occurrence of firearms-related violent crime in many of our neighborhoods take a heavy toll on the hearts of the entirety of this great nation. ATF shares the nation's desire to combat gun violence. It is our job and it is what we do every day. ATF's mission to protect our communities from violent criminals, criminal organizations, the illegal use and trafficking of firearms, and the illegal use and storage of explosives and acts of arson and bombings. I often say ATF's goal is to be no better partner, and that is why a major key to ATF's impact on enhancing public safety is the work we do every day in partnership with our state and local law enforcement agencies. We seek to achieve this goal through hard work in the trenches and through the unique expertise we provide. The resources we provide to our partners include the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network, known as NIBIN, and firearms tracing, the two federal resources the Major City Chiefs Association has identified as far and away as the most valuable federal resources they use in their fight against firearms violence. ATF is a small agency with a big mission. Today I would like to provide you with some examples of what we do with the resources you all give us, and I hope these examples point to what we can do to have an even bigger impact in combating violent crime in the future. In my written statement, as you mentioned, I provided a more complete list of what we do with the resources you give us, but for my oral testimony I will highlight just a few. The past several years we have been assessing how we use the tools we have in order to be ahead of the curve with regard to violent crime. In fact, I would say we have played a significant role in actually changing the nature of criminal investigations, driving change in the way that we use technology and thus helping to drive change in the way our local law enforcement partners use technology. An example of our efforts to expand our investigative abilities is the transformation of ATF's NIBIN. When a firearm is discharged, it ejects a shell casing, leaving behind unique markings on the casing. NIBIN is the only nationwide network that allows for the capture and comparison of 3D ballistic images of spent shell casings recovered from crime scenes and crime gun test fires. In the past, the technology existed primarily in our labs to generate evidence for judicial proceedings, but our efforts have directly caused NIBIN to become an investigative leads generator, often linking crimes previously thought to be unrelated. Since 2016, ATF has provided these image matching services at one centralized location in Huntsville, Alabama, called our National Correlation and Training Center. Correlation is the process of comparing images in the NIBIN system and is cost prohibitive for many police departments nationwide. Currently, ATF conducts correlation reviews for more than 250 law enforcement agencies with results within 48 hours or less. We plan to continue to expand this essential service, and our goal would be to offer it to all NIBIN participants by the end of fiscal year 2020. The success of NIBIN is illustrated by a case recently adjudicated in Detroit, Michigan. In January 2017, a non-fatal shooting occurred at a Detroit gas station. Months later, in April 2017, there was another shooting, this one fatal, at a different gas station. By collecting the shell casings at both scenes and using surveillance footage from the first non-fatal shooting, investigators were able to link up both casings to a single suspect who was arrested and successfully prosecuted. A study conducted by Rutgers University regarding the use of NIBIN in New Jersey found that when you have two shootings are matched through NIBIN, there's a 50% chance that a firearm is going to be used in another shooting in the next 90 days. Our protocols are designed to identify and arrest those violent criminals as soon as possible to prevent them from engaging in more violence. As these NIBIN machines and our correlation capabilities are implemented across the country, ATF will be able to integrate data from localities throughout the network, allowing our experts in Huntsville to generate an even higher volume of actionable investigative leads. Violent crime knows no boundaries, so our work at the national level supporting local law enforcement is a key part of connecting the dots across traditional boundaries. NIBIN is also the cornerstone of another way we continue to transform criminal investigations, through our crime gun intelligence centers. Located in each ATF field division, crime gun intelligence centers are collaborative efforts that use cutting-edge technology and a dedicated investigative team to identify shooters and their sources of crime guns. Our Crime Gun Intelligence Center best practices have revolutionized the way criminal investigations are conducted, bringing NIBIN and our firearms tracing capabilities into a one-stop shop. This allows us the ability to direct our intelligence to go after the trigger pullers in an even more efficient and effective way than ever before. Let me provide a real-life example from New York. Is how we use crime gun intelligence. In 2009, an enforcer in a violent drug trafficking organization shot and killed the mother of 2 children. In 2010, another member of this organization was shot and killed because they feared he would cooperate with law enforcement. NIBIN linked those 2 murders to the same gun, and our application of crime gun intelligence, now generated in all crime gun intelligence centers, assisted in identifying and arresting the shooter, who in 2017 was sentenced to life in prison plus 10 years. Chairman Serrano, Ranking Member Aderholt, and members of the subcommittee, I hope I have relayed why I feel that your investment in ATF is money well spent. We know that in order to fight violent crime, we must be an integrated and resourceful organization, nimble in responding to an ever-changing environment with technological sophistication. ATF personnel know there is no higher priority than protecting the American public. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Director. Minutes, and try to keep it to 5 minutes, and we will include your statement in the record. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Serrano, Ranking Member Aderholt, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Christine Halverson, and I am the current Acting Assistant Director of the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division, as we heard earlier, otherwise known as CJIS. I'm pleased to be here with you today to discuss the FBI's efforts to halt the flow of gun violence facing our communities. Let me first assure you, the people of the FBI remain committed to doing whatever is necessary to prevent violence, which leads to the tragedies within our communities. For the last few months of my 23-year career, I've had the honor to serve alongside the hardworking men and women in the CJIS division who every day are committed to protecting our communities from violence. I'm extremely honored and humbled to speak on their behalf of the significant efforts we have and continue to make within the FBI to one day end gun violence. We are leading several initiatives with our law enforcement partners to ensure we are all best equipped and positioned to mitigate and respond to these violent threats. To do this, the FBI is focusing on partnerships, sharing and evaluating intelligence, and conducting continuous process improvement, looking at our policies, procedures, and the development of our people so we can better assess our posture against the threats while upholding the Constitution of the United States. For example, in order to improve our daily operations, the FBI has increased staff levels at the National Threat Operations Center, formerly known to you all as PAL, and that's thanks to the committee's support. It has refined its organizational structure and training to support expanded management and appropriate referrals to law enforcement to ensure imminent threats to life and national security events are handled in a timely and appropriate manner. It is building and strengthening partnerships with 911 call centers, suicide prevention hotlines, fusion centers, and other federal government agencies who also receive public tips through their online or call centers. Currently, NTOC operates 24/7 with more than 200 members. The members receive and assess public leads and tips made to FBI field offices via phone or e-tips, and when necessary, disseminate that actionable intelligence to action officers. In calendar year 2018 alone, NTOC personnel answered more than 655,000 calls and 755,000 e-tips. The NTOC standard operating procedures has also been modified to ensure standardization. Additionally, NTOC members are provided threat briefings, threat to life, and guidance on school shooting training, reiterating its responsibility to escalate threats to life complaints and ensuring critical information is being relayed clearly, efficiently, and timely to the appropriate action officer. A number of important IT changes has also taken effect at CJIS, and they've been implemented to streamline the operations, add critical reporting, and create call auditing features. CJIS also is responsible, as you said earlier, to the NICS for the NICS system, the National Background Check System. NICS is a computerized system which aids in determining if a person's criminal history disqualifies them from possessing or receiving firearms. I would like to level set the committee on how the FBI processes NICS transactions. When a requesting business initiates a NICS transaction, a name and date of birth check is conducted against 3 databases for possible matches. For all FBI NICS transaction where the database checks are negative, the NICS transaction is preceded within seconds, sometimes minutes, and it's purged from the system within 24 hours. For NICS transactions processed by the FBI where potentially prohibiting records are returned, the FBI has to initiate a manual review to determine if the record demonstrates a prohibition to the firearm possession. I want to take a second to talk about the detailed manual review process so you all can live in the day in the life of a NICS operator. Each manual review is labor intensive as the reviewer only has limited information as well as must be knowledgeable of the varying state-to-state prohibitions as well for firearms possession. At the conclusion of the manual review, the outcome is noted as either a proceed, deny, or delay. In most cases, a delay is issued as the FBI lacks the appropriate information necessary to make a determination. To obtain this information, the FBI makes requests of their law enforcement partners to provide the information as soon as possible. The FBI maintains the transaction as delayed until they receive the information necessary to make the determination, or if the information is not received, it is purged from the NICS system within the 88 days. Since 2010, NICS has experienced substantial increases in the volume of NICS transactions. For example, for Black Friday of 2018, they experienced the highest volume for the highest number of days in the history of NICS. In that one day alone, NICS processed 180,000 transactions. To help better equip and position our law enforcement partners, the FBI continues to provide basic active shooter training, response training to sworn law enforcement officers within the United States, and continues to collect active shooter data. From fiscal year 2015 to 2019, the FBI has trained approximately 58,000 law enforcement officers. We've developed and delivered courses designed to assist in the implementation and management of intelligence-led policing, focusing on reduction of crime violence. In short, today's FBI shares more information with our partners than ever before. Our partnerships are strong, and we continually are assessing where the FBI can do better and making changes wherever possible. We are working shoulder to shoulder with our partners at every level of law enforcement to halt the flow of gun violence facing our communities. We greatly appreciate the support of the subcommittee in all that we do. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'm now happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Thank you both for your testimony. Mr. Brendan, ATF currently inspects approximately 8% of all federal firearms licensees, or FFLSs, each year. What funding and personnel would you need to increase that to 20%? And does ATF have a target for what percentage should be inspected each year? If not, what percentage would you recommend as a matter of best practice? And let me tell you that I've been in Congress quite a long time, and on this committee quite a long time. It's very rare to have the chairman or the ranking member or anyone say, how much money do you need? It's usually, you're asking too much, so if you can tell us.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question, and hey, we'll take whatever you give us, you know, as far as far as our industry operation investigators, we have about, say, 850, but really about 684 are actually doing the inspections. Each one, they work their tails off. They do about 40 to 50 per year. And one of the things with these inspections is that in the firearms industry, about 50% of the FFLs, the Federal Firearms Licensee, are new within the last 5 years. So these IOIs, when someone establishes a business, we want them to be successful. And the IOIs personally meet with them, go over the regulations and the administrative documents that they need. So that eats up a lot of the time. We can always do more with IOIs. And to answer your question of our ROIs, if we had a few hundred more, could we do more? Sure. To try to maximize with whatever resources were allocated, we are using a new type of way of like a CompStat with our inspections to go after the people that are worthy of inspection, and we're having oversight at the headquarters level so that when the field divisions, each field division will give us their plan for the year, their domain assessment, and we will have headquarters review to make sure they are inspecting the proper targets. You know, I've heard it referred to as, you know, the troubled dealers that we don't have attention on. And I have to say, I've been in my position 7.5 years now, and we have improved, and we continue to improve as we should, as any organization should, be continuous process improvement. But I would say we would need a few hundred more industry operation investigators to accomplish the percent that you recommended.
A couple of hundred would bring you to 20%, you said.
As best as I can answer right now, sir, with yes, I would be comfortable in saying that that would help us. Obviously have more progress, but I believe that would be accurate.
Last summer, the New York Times did an investigation of ATF's inspections of gun dealers that revealed that supervisors downgraded recommendations to revoke these gun dealers' licenses. How many of these recommendations to revoke licenses get downgraded each year?
Sir, I'll get back to the committee with the specific numbers, but I will explain the process. And it was a process, to be fair, that you didn't have inconsistencies applied around the country depending on who the DIO, the Director of Industry Operations, was. There's one for each of the 25 field divisions. So it comes up and is reviewed, and the whole thing is that we address the issue and that there is national oversight to ensure there is consistency and fairness applied to the process.
Let me ask you another question. Several years ago, Congress prohibited ATF from requiring that federal firearms licensees conduct physical inventories of their premises. To what extent does this restriction impede ATF's ability to inspect the FFLS?
Well, sir, we follow the laws that you pass and the funds you give us to do that. So we operate within the confines of that. I will say there's a program where the FFLs have been receptive, and it's when they were victims of a burglary or a robbery. And we respond as an integrated team of ATF special agents and ATF industry operations investigators, and along with the local police. And a key component is helping the FFL determine the inventory, the firearms that were being stolen, so they could be entered into NCIC that the FBI controls. And we know from those burglaries and robberies that those are no longer lawful commerce. They're crime guns, and they're going to be used to shoot people. And most likely the people that are going to come up against them are the brave men and women on patrol in uniform.
Thank you. Ms. Abelson, I understand NICS relies on 3 main databases: the NIC Crime Database, the Interstate Identification Index System, and the NICS Index, which includes records not in the other 2 databases, particularly from states and other agencies, to include mental health records. An important point is that states provide their information voluntarily. Would you agree that it is critical to have timely and complete information from the states to ensure NICS has what it needs to make accurate and timely assessments of gun purchases and eligibility?
So it sounds like you know our process very, very well. So yes, the firearms background checks.
Somebody does on staff, for sure.
There you go. So as I had said in my opening statement, the firearms background checks are only as good as the information we have at the time that we have it. So the operator, when they're reviewing it, we call them legal instrument examiners, when they review the NICS request that comes in, the background check that comes, they're going off the information they have at that point in time and then request further information if we need it. So the more timely the information, the quicker we can make a decision and move forward with the process.
And what records do we need to get state or federal partners to improve submission of relevant health and other records?
So I'm just confused.
What records do we need to get states or federal partners to improve submission of relevant health and other records?
So when you're going through it, the Fixed NICS Act was a big help to us with getting the dispositions into the system and working through that and having the states and the grants that were funded by DOJ to help the states get through that, and we're still working through that process to get the relevant records that we need into the system.
Let me just ask a question that I don't have here. What is what would you say is the morale of the folks that work in your agencies? Because a lot of times we hear that people feel that their hands are tied on some of the things they want to do. What's the sense? If I, was to talk to employees at ATF, for instance, would I find people who say we could be doing more, but we're not allowed to, or we can't do more? What would I find?
Sir, I believe morale in the field, the men and women that are running and gunning, going after the trigger pullers and the traffickers providing those trigger pullers with the gun, they do it with passion. It's not who they became, it's who they always been. It's in their DNA to go after and do this type of work, and I'm sure it's the same in the FBI and all the other law enforcement organizations. But I would not be doing my job up here of the continual compression of our budget. Our budget, where the costs have gone up, even though our budget has gone up, the costs have gone up higher. And to be candid with you, I've been an agent for ATF 30 years. The cost of conducting criminal investigations has gone up just with everybody has a cell phone on their life. So the costs for digital media exploitation, social media warrants, and so forth. And I know we're not alone, except the one thing that they would maybe feel is that we're underappreciated for the job that these brave men and women do. We're the smallest component in DOJ and law enforcement, FBI, DEA, Marshals, and then ATF. But regardless of that, I ask them, I attend every academy class mostly, and I ask them why they come on the job, and they come from other agencies, and we even had a couple from the FBI, and then yeah, we love stealing people, the Secret Service, everybody.
You would take people from the FBI?
Oh, we have class, yeah. But the reason I say that is, and we have a great relationship with the FBI, is the mission. It's they want to go after, to the point you're in the Bronx, they want to go after the people that are hurting people. These are good Americans that are saying, hey, let us go after the trigger pullers and the traffickers. I know from personal experience, there's nothing like locking up a killer.
Thank you. Mr. Alahol?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. As you know, last year is when the President signed the Fixed NICS Act, which requires all federal agencies to certify twice a year that they are uploading criminal record information to NICS, and requiring the Attorney General in coordination with the states to establish implementation plans to ensure maximum coordination reporting records. Director Halverson, let me direct this question to you. Has Fixed NICS, and you alluded to it, but I'll give a little bit more of a definite answer on this. Has Fixed NICS made a difference in states and federal agencies that submit these relevant records to NICS?
So the Fixed NICS Act has been very relevant to the work that NICS is doing every single day. All the submissions are due March 25th by 2019 by all the agencies that were required to submit one for the Fixed NICS Act. And we've issued a report in December 2018 and February 2019, and out of the 56 agencies that were required, 18 have yet to submit, but we know that they're on target for the March date. We have actually created a whole outreach group as well with our local and state partners that actually are working with the Fixed NICS Act on the grants that DOJ has provided to them to help them get through this. And again, we're holding their hand through that process. They're all in different phases, all in different stages of how to do it, but we're working through that and technology fixes and how we can better assist them to get them in. And overall, it has been tremendous, including for the appeal process. We are under the 60 days every single week on the appeal process because we're getting the dispositions in that we're getting in and able to, adjust them as quickly as we possibly can because of the dispositions coming in.
What would be the impact on the FBI if all states require firearm background checks on private sales across the U.S.?
So obviously, the workload would tremendously increase, but we don't know what that would be because right now private sales aren't tracked. So we don't know what the volume increase would actually be to NICS. But if that was implemented, obviously, our workload would increase.
To the extent to which states work on a collaborative effort with the FBI to conduct NICS checks varies depending on the willingness of the state governments to act as a liaison for NICS. Federal firearm licensees will contact either the FBI or the designated state point of contact to initiate the background checks on individuals' possession or receiving the firearms. So my next question, are states and federal agencies mandated to contribute records to NICS?
At this time, they're not mandated. It's voluntary.
What is the difference between a full-time state point of contact and a non-point of contact state?
So when the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 1983 was implemented, states could actually choose one of three options. So they could become a full POC state, a non-POC state, or a partial POC state. In states designated as a full POC state, FFLs utilize the POC to submit their NICS checks, so all of that is done by the state. In state designated as non-POC, NICS does all the checks. And then we have other states that we do some handgun checks or we do long gun checks, and those are the partial POC states.
Okay.
So we kind of have a mix of it all.
Has NICS volume increased, say, over the last 5 years?
Yes. In 2018, it was 26.1 million.
Yeah. What is the difference in volume that the FBI processes versus state POCs?
We actually don't have that number, and so I would be great to get back to the committee and work with the states to provide that number to you at a later date.
Okay, yeah, if you get back with that, that'd be great. Can a private seller utilize NICS today?
They can if they go through an FFL. They're able to go to an FFL and submit the private sale through the FFL.
This committee has considered on many occasions an amendment aimed at restricting sales of firearms to persons on the so-called terrorist watch list. Does that amendment raise any concerns with you?
I can understand why you are asked that question because I've been in the counterterrorism division now since 9/11 and was in New York when 9/11 happened, so completely understand the question. But when we go through that and we look at that, we take each one of those as a case by case to make sure that there's prohibitions in there. Just because they're on the terrorist watch list, right? There's a due process that's in order, and so we refer those over to the individuals, and we work as in that 3-day window to try to determine if there's prohibitions in there for each individual that does hit on the watch list.
Because clearly it is easy to get on the watch list because something, when I say easy, it is very common for people who may not should be on the watch list to some way get on the watch list because of the name being similar and various other things.
There. Yes, sir.
If enacted for something of this nature were enacted, how would the FBI square the requirements of that amendment with the constitutional guarantee of due process of law?
So I think we have to wait till the legislation comes out and work through that legislation with you after it comes out on implementing procedures and processes behind it after we see the legislation.
And just my last question here, just as Nick needs to have the appropriate disqualifying records, it also is important for NICS to not to contain inaccurate records or records that aren't prohibiting. What impact on the system do extraneous or inaccurate records have?
So we'd have to go back and do a study. We frequently audit the system to make sure that we have accurate records, and we go back to the different federal agencies and law enforcement partners to update their records frequently. But if you need a full impact, I'd have to get back to you on that.
Okay, yeah, just let us know if I could, what impact that would have would be helpful. So, all right, I'll yield out.
Thank you, Ms. So we'll start our members round with Ms. Meng, and please keep in mind to try to keep it to 5 minutes. And remember that this is simply a love tap.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, for holding this important hearing today, and to both our witnesses for being here and your work for our country. Wanted to ask a question about domestic violence and firearms, which, as you know, can be a lethal combination. An average of 3 to 4 Americans are murdered by intimate partners daily. Most of these victims are women, and most of them are murdered by abusers using firearms. 35% of women in the U.S. who are killed by men are killed by intimate partners using firearms. Ms. Halverson, how many default proceeds to prohibited persons occurred last year, and what percentage of them were to domestic abusers?
So it's a good question and a very, very important topic that you're discussing. I don't have the numbers on that. We don't do auto proceeds if there's any hits in the system. So there wouldn't be, it would have to be there would be hits in the system if there was, and they would go into the delay queue, and then that manual review process would continue through.
And I know you also mentioned how the Fix NICS Act has helped, has made a difference. Is that also true for the entry of domestic violence records? How has that changed from before and after Fix NICS?
So we continue to work with our partners on getting the domestic violence information put into the systems. Sometimes it's incomplete and inaccurate information we get it, so it will hit on it, but it might not have the right code that we need. So we will reach out and get those codes into the system that we need in order to make the right determination. And there's also limitations on there's other factors we have to prove in that domestic violence on the relationship, the violence, based on the statutory requirements right now that are necessary to make that determination.
Okay. Do you feel like you have the resources you need to ensure that agencies put in place state-by-state implementation plans?
To join on, any more resources are always helpful in the process and adding to that. So it would be great. But we do handle them, like I said, case by case, and we do get through each one.
And Mr. Brandon, what is the ATF doing to be a resource to local law enforcement agencies to ensure that these adjudicated abusers don't have access to firearms?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. For instance, if we received a delayed denial from the FBI, and meaning that the firearm has transferred after 3 full business days, the federal firearms licensee has that option, and all of a sudden it's determined that the person has a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. That's a priority to ATF, and we pounce on it, because we don't want someone getting hurt by someone that shouldn't have a firearm. So that is, we're vigilant with that. I get briefed every month on that, and we have our eye on the ball, and we work hand in hand with our FBI partners because they realize that as well. So if we get that alert, it goes to the division, move on it.
Thank you. Also wanted to talk about the importance of active shooter drills, which are increasing. I'm a mom of 2 young boys. I'm always thinking about their safety and all our children across the country. A recent analysis by the Washington Post found that during the last school year, more than 4 million students experienced at least one lockdown or drill, including about 200,000 students in kindergarten or preschool. Even in my district, we have local synagogues conducting active shooter and terrorist prevention training for their congregants. I saw that ATF was part of the working group to craft the 2015 Interagency Security Committee Policy and Best Practices Guide, but this guidance was designed to apply only to buildings and facilities occupied by federal employees. To what extent was ATF's participation in crafting this guidance, and can we work together in researching strategic approaches to preventing this type of violence, specifically in public or private schools and even in houses of worship?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. We weren't consulted, but ATF remains at the ready for any expertise we have, which we have a lot of tactical experts. We will work hand in hand with our law enforcement partners to protect America.
So I also am a mother of 2 young children, so obviously this is a topic that every day, and my kids are paranoid because my husband's also an agent, so they live in a different world sometimes than other children. But we've held in the FBI in June 2018, we held a school security summit where we brought in all our law enforcement partners, as well as in this last fall, we also brought in different schools to come in and talk about what the threats are, not even just from a violent crime aspect, from a counterterrorism aspect, and other aspects of threats that are facing them every single day, and walk through that. And so we're continuing to do that outreach. We continue to work with them and get them to understand that what the current threat environment looks like and how they can operate within that while still keeping the laughter inside the schools.
Thank you. I yield back.
The beauty of being a member of Congress, you recognize the gentlewoman from New York, where it was pretty chilly this morning, and now we recognize the gentleman from Hawaii, where it was not, I imagine.
Apologies for that, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both of you, and I want to first of all say thank you to you and all of the great people that serve with you. You know, you've got a tough job. You're on the front lines of what I believe and many believe is now clearly a public health epidemic, and you're obviously on the front lines of a continued political divide on whether and to what extent to regulate guns. What I'm focused on here is not so much that policy side, but the appropriation side of this, which is, as the chair said, do you have the resources you need to do your job? And I will say up front that a big picture, high altitude observation is that the system simply seems to be getting overwhelmed at sometimes with the not only increasing gun violence, but with increasing demands on the existing laws, much less the new laws that that I and other people propose to increase protections. And so the basic question is the federal government keeping up with the resources, both financial and positions, for you to do your job? And I use one example, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand this correctly, there were somewhere in the range of 6,000 checks that really weren't completed in time in a recent fiscal year. Is that correct? Is that about right?
So it's not that the checks weren't completed. On your question, are you speaking about the gun retrievals that referred over to ATF?
No, I'm talking background checks. So within the 3-day period, that they did not come back within 3 days.
So it's a very cumbersome process. So it's not that the checks weren't completed. It was sometimes we don't get all the information in order to make the determination on the checks. So there's a difference there.
Okay. Well, I don't want to get into the semantics. The point is we have a very tight time frame. And that time frame was not met within 3 days, and therefore there were a sequence of events that occurred in terms of people being able to acquire the guns, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that's a lot. And the question is, do you have the resources to, obviously many of us propose to extend that deadline because we think it's too tight to start with. But even assuming that deadline, 6,000 not to be completed within that period, that is a logistical issue because at the right level, I suppose, of funding and positions, you could in fact whittle that 6,000 down significantly. So I'm looking at your budget. I'm just looking at the budget that we got, at least the skinny budget. Don't have the detail yet. And I'm just looking in the NCIS portion, and it says here, increases by 4.2 million, 40 positions, and if I calculate that correctly, that's an increase of about close to 4% in terms of money and about 6% in positions. That just doesn't seem to me to be a lot of money and positions to increase by, considering the testimony that you have given and all of the other evidence in terms of what seems to be a real problem in implementing the current law, much less, you know, changes in the law, just from a resource perspective. Do you share that perspective?
So, yeah, the 40 bodies absolutely helped, so we want to thank the committee for funding those bodies because they absolutely helped the staff that was there. In the FBI, we have statisticians that work off of the data when we know gun sales from years are happening, and we have to surge. We're ending up surging employees from other areas that are critical need to assist in the gun check process when we have those times peaks like Black Friday, right? When we have that, we have people already trained up who can assist in that. So the FBI is continuing to surge employees back and forth to assist with the checks that we're doing.
What you're describing to me is a good faith effort to accommodate existing limitations. That's not the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking is, are you adequately resourced in your view, or do you believe, I'm going down the lines of the chair's question, which is, do you have what you need? You've got public safety in your hands, and do you have the resources that you need? And I make the point again, I think that the budget request in this department seems to be pretty skinny for getting the job done, considering the trends and considering your testimony. So I'm just asking you straight out, do you think that this is an adequate budget request?
So I know for the 2020 budget, which we still haven't received yet, that we would be looking to make a budget request enhancement.
Okay. Well, I'm telling you what the budget says, because I have it, and it says 4% money and 6% positions.
That was for fiscal year 19, correct?
No, I think that's the 2020 program enhancement proposal.
That was what we got in fiscal year 19, right? Yeah. Okay, we're requesting again. Okay, sorry. Yeah. So I think the more resources we have, the better off we'd be in having not surge resources back and forth.
It seems that there has been, you know, obviously in a budget process, there is a policy judgment component to it, and there's an internal discussion as to what is adequate, and there are cost-benefit analyses and trade-offs and, you know, all the things that go into a budget. What has your familiarity been with those discussions? Was there a discussion about whether proposed increases in this department should be limited or enhanced or maximized, or, you know, what's the priority in terms of background checks?
The priority in background checks is trying to get through all the background checks right before the 3-day window closes, right, to minimize the risk that we possibly can, and to actually also allow people who should be possessing weapons to allow them to possess weapons.
I guess I'm not trying to be too hard on you, at least,
No,
but
it's
you're in
okay.
the, I just wonder whether this had the priority that it deserves. So that's what I'm trying to get to from a budget
It absolutely
perspective.
does have the priority, because we wouldn't be surging individuals off of other programs to surge to meet the need when we need to, right?
Well, you wouldn't have to surge them if you had adequate funding to start with. So I don't want to go back to that surge thing, because that's getting taken away from somewhere else.
Correct.
Okay, so that's a temporary solution, not a permanent
Correct.
solution.
Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Brannon, you made reference to implementing the law as is your charge, and I'm asking you a little bit about whether we need to change some of that law. And I get to it from appropriations because in some of these areas you are subject to appropriations riders. You are subject to appropriations riders that have been included in recent years, and in you know, various areas to include restrictions on gun dealer physical inventories, working with other federal agencies, creating searchable databases of records, multiple gun traces, looking for patterns. Those are all appropriation riders that are limitations on your funding without actually being laws per se, but they have the effect of law. Do you believe that we should reverse some of those appropriations riders? Would that help you do your job better?
Sir, can I get the same question as Christine did about funding?
Yes, you can. I didn't see your funding go up at all in the area of, if you want that question, I'll ask you that question, because I'm not sure I saw.
Sir, I love ATF, I love America, I like guns, I hate gun violence. And truth be told, our budget for 2020, if it goes and we salute, we'll have to let go 300, or retreat 377 positions. So ATF won't be as able to do what it can do today. 2019, we cut $40 million to keep status quo. We're not, you hear people say trim the fat, right? Then we trimmed into muscle, now we're trimming into bone. I can't end my career as an ATF agent who loves America, loves our partnerships, and know the consequence of ATF not being properly funded. I don't care if a Democrat or Republican, I'm an American, and I've seen people suffer from gun violence my whole career, so maybe that's the saturation point. So thank you for letting me answer your question.
I thank you for your incredible candor. That's what I want. You know, that's what we want. We want to know, are you adequately resourced? I looked at the FY 2020 budget, saw no increase in your area focused on gun violence, and I wondered the same thing. What is the policy judgment that goes into that?
And sir, if I can tell you, the Deputy Attorney General, he's been phenomenal. Former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, when I mentioned the Correlation Center, when our passback came back last year, I didn't even get a call. It was so bad. If it wasn't for them fighting for us, right, we would have been crushed. And then you see the benefit of this Correlation Center. This doesn't, when those rounds are in the street, we don't know if the person's male, female, white, black, or brown, but we know we got a trigger puller. And to get the money, and we've been robbing Peter to pay Paul to deliver on everything. And it's the drip, 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 and now we're cutting into bone. And so I thank you for letting me do that, and hopefully you can see that I'm not trying to be political, I'm trying to be honest, you know, and I'm assuming, you know, under oath.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Brandon, thank you for your candor as well. And thank you for both of you being here today. I want to talk about the Charleston loophole bill that the House just passed, H.R. 1112, which of course is designed to close that loophole by preventing individuals from purchasing firearms from a gun dealer without a background check. The administration opposed the bill, and I'm trying to figure out why. We're talking about a law that would simply ensure that people who can't pass a background check are not able to purchase a firearm from a licensed gun dealer. The problem is, as it stands today, that there's this 3-day waiting period, and after the 3-day waiting period, people who are not supposed to get a gun can pick one up from a gun store if the FBI has not finished the background check, hence the reason for H.R. 1112. FBI reports that in 2017, 6,004 firearms were potentially sold by gun stores to criminals because of this. So criminals including violent felons, dangerous fugitives, domestic abusers, people like that, because the FBI had not completed their work in the 3-day time allotted. That was an increase of nearly 2,000 guns from 2016. So the first question for you, Mr. Brandon, is how would passage of H.R. 1112 impact the ATF's efforts to prevent gun violence?
Sir, thank you for the question. And obviously, I'm in the executive branch, and the administration came out with a statement of administrative position that they oppose it. So I will just say that I can tell you what the consequence would be if more time is allowed, say from Christine's folks. Obviously, more time you have, the more time then you have time to make a decision. I think transferring a firearm is an important decision. But the consequence would be that there would be less delayed denials for ATF agents to go out and track down and getting these guns. So then the agents would have more time, and I keep referring to going out to the people that are shooting people, which is a smaller number of people, and we know how to do it with our intelligence-led, risk-based, the Crime Gun Intelligence Centers. So that's the downstream. If there's more time, there's less delayed denials, and that's just making a logical inference of the more time you have, the more time you have to make a better decision.
Thank you, sir. I thought so too. Now, okay, so when these loopholes or default proceed transactions, in other words, where the 3 days goes by and the background check isn't done and the person gets the gun, do you have to go out and collect these firearms or conduct an investigation if the purchaser is later denied by the NICS?
Yes, sir. There's a process. We work hand in hand, and we act on those delayed denials within 48 hours, and then they'll get, if they meet these parameters for prosecution for each judicial district, they'll be referred to the ATF field office. First, they'll try to just reach out to the person to see if they'll bring the firearm back to the federal firearms licensee or transfer it to a non-prohibited third party that won't reside with the person. And if they don't, then it's, you know, going out to retrieve the firearm from the person that's prohibited from possessing it. And
So
that's-
Director Brandon, this is not a pop quiz, and if you don't have a ballpark off the top of your head, I won't blame you, but do you have any statistics regarding how successful ATF is at recovering firearms in delayed denial cases?
Sir, I won't guess at numbers, but
Okay.
I will say that even there was an OIG review a few years ago that said when we get the information from the FBI, is 99% that the system is working accurately, and that myself and my team, we put a focus on these delayed denials, and God forbid, like a Charleston, you know, and so forth. Nobody wants that to happen. The FBI and ATF, no organization wants to say, hey, person got the gun, they shouldn't have had the gun. And if I just want to comment, we've had a great relationships with the firearms industry. A lot of the big box stores, even though they say, yeah, we can do it, they make it their policy not to transfer it until they hear from the FBI. So that's something that we tried to do within our authority, just to share things with them. And to be honest, I guess the margin of profit on a firearm is less than the accessories that would be sold with it, but it's not worth their headache to have any public relations
Understood.
nightmare.
Thank you for that. So I'm delving into your world right now, and I'm kind of imagining the picture, and I want to get confirmation from you, if I can. Isn't that potentially dangerous, where you have to go out and retrieve a firearm that somebody that really should not have got hold of a firearm in the first place has? You're talking about dangerous people and retrieving their guns from them that they never should have got. Isn't that potentially dangerous?
Sure, sir. It's analogous to the man and woman on uniform in patrol. They pull over someone, they don't know what they're going to be dealing with. And even though we have the advantage of doing some workup, you never know. It's like high risk, low risk. It's unknown risk. So it is dangerous, inherently dangerous, retrieving a firearm from
That's
someone.
what I thought. So wouldn't H.R. 1112 keep your agency from having to go through that exercise, going out to pick up guns from dangerous criminals that can't legally have them?
Sir, like I mentioned, that downstream, where the people that wouldn't have to be doing that, they'd be going out after the trigger pullers and everything, so it'd be probably even more dangerous, because we know these people are actually pulling the trigger and shooting people. But to your point, it would have less touch points with the public if downstream there were less delayed
And so
denials.
wouldn't this bill help your agency devote its very scarce resources to other important investigations and activities?
Sir, whatever laws you pass, we'll follow, and then being, again, in the executive branch, you know, the chain of command goes up, you know, to the White House, and we follow our marching orders, but we'll always act within the appropriations and the laws that you pass.
And I want to ask the same question for you, Ms. Halverson. Would the passage of H.R. 1112 eliminate or greatly reduce the time and money that you need to spend on sending out firearm retrieval referrals to the ATF?
So just to comment back on, obviously surging resources, we surge that so we can meet the 3-day window. It would absolutely stop us needing to be able to surge resources to meet that 3-day window. And as we work through the process, right, any more time on the process would absolutely assist in the process.
And it would save money too, wouldn't it?
That, sir, I don't know. We'd have to go back and look at that on saving money.
Very good. Thank you so much. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
A 2016 Justice IG audit of the handling of firearms purchase denials noted a big drop in prosecution since FY 2013. A recent GAO report requested by this subcommittee found that DOJ rarely prosecuted individuals who falsify information, such as not disclosing felony convictions. In 2017, of 112,090 denials, ATF referred 12,710 for further investigation, resulting in only 12 prosecutions. In contrast, GAO found 3 states that reviewed their denials that had a higher proportion of referrals and a high conviction rate. GAO recommended ATF assess the use of warnings to applicants who misrepresented their eligibility for gun ownership rather than pursue prosecution in lieu of prosecution. Deputy Director Brandon, has ATF taken action on these recommendations?
Yes, sir. In fact, it was a year ago yesterday that then Attorney General Sessions sent a memo out to all his U.S. attorneys across the country, which incidentally, they've been crushing it with going on with firearms prosecutions. But he addressed that specific issue about lie and try, and that there have been some U.S. attorneys in certain areas of the country that have increased that. The numbers are still relatively small, but the percentage look like it's high percentage increase. But I'd like to get back to the committee with those specific numbers to answer your question regarding standard denials, which is the firearm didn't transfer, the person lied on the form, and the U.S. Attorney's Office prioritized their resources to maximize prosecutions of all the cases they have.
Well, that's the thing. I can tell you that in conversations amongst members of Congress, not in a formal setting, one of the concerns is the low prosecution rate, as we interpret it, as many in the press interpret it. So, did I ask you the right question, or is there something else we could be doing?
No, sir. I can just assure you, like, say say someone has 3 violent felonies or a misdemeanor crime, a domestic violence, and we see that there's a standard denial and they didn't get that. We'll work with the U.S. attorneys, and to be honest, the cuffs have been slapped on a few of them. You know, recently have gotten them through our notification system, so it has improved. And I give Attorney General Sessions credit for cracking the whip with the U.S. attorneys, and they're moving. You know.
And could you tell us to what extent your divisions use warnings in denial cases?
Yes, sir. I mean, and this goes into the regulatory process. You know, ATF, we want people to be successful in their business. They're operating legal businesses with lawful commerce, but we can't be a captured component of our regulatory component. So unless something is really egregious, like as far as a warning letter or a warning conference, it's progressive to try to get them in compliance. But if they don't, and they fail to do that, we'll go after their license, and we've done that, and that's where we have a national look at that, so we're consistent, where one business person says, hey, I was treated differently because you know, I was in Alabama, another was in Pennsylvania. So that's why it was brought up to the national level to be fair to these business people.
Now, the GAO report also showed a patchwork of policies where each ATF field office and each U.S. Attorney's Office had differing standards for investigating and prosecuting individuals who falsify information on their applications and referring cases to state and local authorities. How can we do a better job coordinating these efforts? Should we have someone overseeing these policies to ensure we're all rowing in the same direction?
Sir, one of the things which we established with myself and my team is that every year the special agent in charge for the field division and whatever judicial districts he or she has to certify that there's the what the U.S. Attorney will accept for these standard denial cases, and I think that's you know, been helpful. And the other thing, working with getting the information from the FBI, collaborating, is how can we share this information with state fusion centers, so it can be of benefit. Because you say, hey, you may not want to prosecute this guy, but say he's a gang member, you know, and whatever, hey, he's trying to buy a gun. It can be intel that can be used. So that's how, in past committees, I've been asked that question. We went back and worked as a team. And I really think that's a good way of saying, instead of letting the information sit on standard denials, you know, if they're not going to be prosecuted, how do we share that in intelligence capacity, and that maximizes public safety? And that's how we've approached it.
Now, do we know if different U.S. attorneys have different standards?
Sir, I'll have to get back to you. I was going through a bunch. I believe, just my experience, I think there's 93 judicial districts. I think it would be a statistical improbability to say you got 93 U.S. attorneys who are usually, whatever your Democrat, Republic, they're usually spirited people, and that they have to be consistent across the lines because they're all addressing different things. And I know you know that, sir, with all your experience.
Here's a question you love to be asked. Would additional resources enable ATF to pursue more prosecutions of individuals who falsify or misrepresent their status on Form 4473, which is a firearms transactions record?
Yes, sir. Obviously, more resources would lead to potentially, but and again, it all goes back to what gets prosecuted. And with our limited resources, to be candid, I've been saying if we're not in step with the U.S. Attorney, we're out of step with him or her, because we don't want to waste our time investigating something that's not going to get prosecuted. So, you know, front load it, you know, work as a team, work with our partners, and have maximum value to the American taxpayer to say, hey, go after the violent people that are wreaking havoc, particularly in the inner cities and other areas of the country. I don't want to leave out rural areas, but we could do more with more, sir. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I believe I said what I said to Mr. Case on behalf of the men and women of ATF, who I'm very proud of.
Firearm retrieval is the term used by NICS for the action recommended after a background check is unresolved within the 3 business day time frame, and an FFL proceeds with a firearms transfer but subsequently learns that the request should have been denied. The NICS section then notifies ATF that a prohibited person is in possession of a firearm, and ATF can undertake action to retrieve the firearm. In 2017, 6,004 referrals for retrieval were made to the ATF, but the NICS section and ATF assessed that in 1,140 of these cases, the transfer was undetermined. What does that mean? Transfer undetermined.
Sir, I think it is we'll get the information from the FBI saying, hey, the firearm's transferred, it's a delayed denial. The branch that is in Martinsburg, West Virginia, that looks at this for ATF will have all the documents for each judicial district to say, look at the criminal history. And like, here's one I'm fairly confident in saying. Say the guy had a dope conviction of under 25 grams of cocaine in 1980, nothing else. Would the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecute it? I'd be 99.9% accurate, absent any other intelligence, that it would say, hey, refer that to the division to be looked at, to investigated, because that's the filter. Because there's such a volume, you have to have, it's a prudent step. But say it comes back going, hey, guess what, this guy has a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. He whooped the hell out of his wife or a former partner and everything like that. And that was only 12 months ago or 6 months ago. Get that thing to the division, you know, and let's go get that gun from that guy. And the U.S. attorneys, again, when you have that type of threat to public safety, they'll go after them. But that's the type of filter, sir, that's happened, while the numbers go down to what goes to the field.
One last part to this. Does ATF have a responsibility to confirm that a prohibited person has not taken possession of a firearm in such cases?
Yes, sir. I mean, the delayed denial will indicate that they did take possession of it, and then we'll work to make sure that, like I said, they can return it to the gun shop, to turn it over to a third party that's not prohibited and not cohabitating with them, or that we'll go and get the firearm from them.
Thank you. Mr. Adderhold.
Let me, I got one more question for Director Halverson. Let me, before I go to Director Brandon. What has the FBI done to ensure that it is complying with this 60-day requirement on the Fix NICS Act?
So thanks for asking that question, because it's been a big effort at CJIS that they're actually very proud of, and that they've worked very hard. And so we've actually moved resources from one other area of CJIS over to this group, and they've actually automated a significant amount of the process. And because of the automation that we've put in place and some technical enhancements, they're able to get through the backlog in what the new cases coming in every single day within that, usually within a 45 to 48 day time frame.
Of course, it was back in 1999 that the ATF established the NIBIN, which provides federal, state, and local partner agencies an automated ballistic imaging network. And I understand that NIBIN programs can be expensive, and not every district has a NIBIN site. What is the key goal of NIBIN? And that'd be for you, I'm sorry.
Thanks, sir.
Director
I thought
Brandon.
it went to the FBI for
Yeah,
a second.
I was,
So the key goal in NIBIN is again, like I mentioned, it's to identify the people that are pulling the trigger. And this is where law enforcement, I believe, more so at the local level, but us as federal partners working, we used to target like whole areas and of like a neighborhood. And to be honest, you go in there and to be honest, you tick off a lot of the people, you know, because they think like, hey, why are you focusing on this area and me? What NIBIN helps us do is drill down to the small numbers that the locals know better than anyone of who's pulling the trigger, because it's a smaller percentage of criminals that are actually doing the shootings. And NIBIN gives you that critical lead. And while we've tried to maximize the use of NIBIN, like say the Phoenix PD, a wonderful PD, and they use NIBIN, they open up other PDs in the suburbs to come and submit casings to them, so it's a cost-efficient way, and that this way could relate shootings that may happen in Chandler, Arizona, and Phoenix, Arizona, sir.
oh, can you talk a little bit about why it's vital to overall violent gun reduction strategy?
Yes, sir. And again, I mentioned about our correlation center, and if I can briefly, I know time's short, Mr. Chairman, is someone pulls the trigger on a gun, right? Semi-automatic pistol, casing comes out. What's critical for the police chief, he or she makes it a policy, and not just policy, but change culture. And I've been around where if no one's shot, they clear the run, they move on, the casings could be still lying in the street. You have a comprehensive collection plan of those casings. Those casings go into NIBIN. Someone does another shooting, and all of a sudden there's someone that's dead or there's a non-fatal shooting. It could match that up. We've used it as a leads generator, which is the game changer. We were critically faulted by Sam Houston University. It was funded by a Bureau of Justice Assistance study, I think in 2012. 12 months to 18 months. The information is not timely, relevant, and actionable as much. We've changed it down to 48 hours through the correlation center, and with these PEDs, comprehensive, picking that evidence up in there. So to answer your question, it is vital with our crime gun intelligence centers, with e-tracing, and with other technology that can help us find the casings. They call it gunshot detection technology. I call it like the fish finder and so forth, that you put all that together, sir, and I think it's what you all want is, hey, find the people that are really doing the shootings, and that will have the most value for your limited resources to take these people off the street. We don't care, state, federal, they're the ones causing harm on everybody.
ATF's work has seen a significant increase due to the expansion and growth of commerce within the fire industry, as you noted earlier, and certainly I commend ATF's effort to establish the e-forms, which is the electronic filing process to help reduce submission and processing times, as well as data entry backlogs. And I believe Congress provided a combined $23 million in FY18 and FY19 for activities at the National Firearms Act Division to continue improving the processing of the Act's application to further develop and implement ATF's next generation of e-form systems. Can you give us an update on the improvement to the e-form filings process and to the reduction in the processing backlogs?
Yes, sir, and thank you for the question. I want to stress, because we have our criminal enforcement side and we have our regulatory mission of firearms and explosive industries, and we're sensitive to that equally as well, so we appreciate that funding. One of the things we did with the appropriations you gave us, we put it on contracts, because in order to expand the electronic forms and the speed, we had IT issues, and so we've gone to the cloud. And it's posted on the ATF website, but I can have it provided to committee on the waits. I think now for like Form 1, we're down to a month. When we were shut down, we were prohibited from acting on any certain forms or if it wasn't related to the law enforcement, military, or to a government contract. So we had our wait time down to 5 months. It's gone up a few more months, but our goal is to get that down. But we also did a look at the touch points on how we can be more efficient and effective. So with this money, we saw an IT issue, and now we have contracts that are going to help us speed up the reply from like NFA for the fingerprints and so forth, that we can have this down to days instead of months wait, and that's what those funds are doing. And they, with the CR in 18, we weren't able to put them on contracts right away, so they were now on it from the 18 money. But that will help speed up us processing those forms, and we thank you for that attention.
Good. Can you describe just briefly how the National Firearms Act restricts the sale and the purchase of firearms?
Yes, sir. I mean, you know, I get it, guns are a sensitive issue, but 1934 was the National Firearms Act, so it was machine guns, silencers, you know, the old Tommy guns, and Congress ruled that said, hey, we want to regulate this. So that's where we have the person's name, we have their address, we have the make and model of the serial number of the firearm, and that there's a picture and photographs that come along with it. And the person can't get that firearm until that's approved, and then they can't even transfer that firearm to someone else unless it's approved. So that's how the National Firearms Act works, and it's for those items that Congress declared exceptionally risky to public safety: machine guns, silencers, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns.
Okay. You, as we all know, and it's very unfortunate, Americans have increasingly faced incidents of indiscriminate violence in schools and shopping malls and other public places. Can you elaborate for just a moment on efforts that the ATF and the FBI are involved with to help minimize and respond to when there is an active shooter incident?
Is our response?
Yeah, or just how you can help minimize, or how do y'all help respond to those particular instances?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I'm very proud of, we established an Internet Investigation Center dealing with firearms commerce over the Internet, people doing illegal things and so forth. A byproduct of that, sir, is that our folks became good where they detected information about potential school shooters or other acts of violence. And so we don't publicize it, but we immediately share the information with the locals. And just within the last few months, I think I've had 2 to 3 that have come up to me, and I tell our folks, hey, jump on it. And I have to say, the locals and when FBI and ATF, when we respond to scenes, and the marshals, it's like, you know, that's a DOJ response now. I think we've really improved on that for the benefit. But I just share that, sir, when you asked about threats to school safety or workplace violence. Our Internet Investigation Center, they've have developed an expertise, and we share it with everybody rapidly, to answer your question.
Thanks for the question. And we're making a lot of steps. I mean, it really comes down to partnerships and sharing intelligence, right? And if we're all sharing the intelligence together, we can put the pieces together a lot quicker to try to stop these events from happening. And those partnerships, over the years we've changed. You shouldn't be meeting someone for the first time in your community, right, especially a law enforcement partner, the first time on an active shooter situation. You should be training together, which we're doing with our law enforcement partners and also our federal partners. You should be having active shooter plans together and meeting together, and that's what we as the FBI has been doing throughout the different communities through our SACs.
I think it was you, Director Brandon, you mentioned that it's important to prosecute individuals who lie on their 44 or 73 forms. If a person is denied the ability to purchase a gun because the NICS indicates that they're an illegal alien, do you think that the individual should be prosecuted and this information be transmitted to the law enforcement partners at ICE due to the danger of a criminal alien groups like we've seen with MS-13?
Sir, it's a great question, and if it doesn't get prosecuted at the district level by the U.S. Attorney based on their parameters, I'll give you an example. Southwest Border, our folks in Phoenix, Arizona, have taken that information, they share it with ICE. And then as far as saying, hey, even if they're going for an immigration hearing, is that, hey, we want you to know that this person tried to buy a firearm in this state. So that's where, hopefully I'm answering your question, is that we're trying to maximize that standard denial intelligence that we get, and knowing to say, okay, we're not going to get prosecuted, but what can we do? and we're putting it through the state fusion centers, and at local levels where, again, where you have immigration stuff, we'll share that, and they can use it as they see fit.
So bottom line is they should be prosecuted, so absolutely. At
So
one-
look,
at-
MS-13,
Yeah.
yeah, I hate them, right? I mean, I think it's like, you know, so it's going after MS-13, we do that, the FBI does that, we're working hand in glove, locking up MS-13 gang members that are shooting and chopping people and everything like that. I don't know what your political stripe is or whatever, how could anybody argue against that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Halverson, fix NICS, status of implementation, and do you have the adequate resources to fully and timely implement?
So we've already been implementing Fix NICS for months now. We are working, obviously, as I testified to earlier, we're within that 45 to 48-day time window on the appeals, which we're under the 60 days. And part of that, too, is we've hired contractors to help us as well, which I forgot to mention. They go out and get dispositions for us that we haven't been able to get, and they research dispositions to fill that void of the dispositions as well. So we have the resources there to adequately address that process. As far as working with our partners, I mean, there's a lot of partner agencies involved here with Fix NICS, including our local, state, and tribal partners, right, and our federal agencies.
What's the status of the implementation plans at the state level?
So we're still, at the state level, we're still working with each state individually, and their plans are due back by March 25th in a couple, next week or the week after.
I see.
And so we have some of the plans ready, and we're working with each individual state, and actually each individual municipality, because everybody's different on where they're at, what stages they're at. So everybody has different needs. So we have plans with each one of those to address
Do you feel
them.
you're adequately resourced to implement fully timely right now?
So the FBI is addressing it with the adequate resources we have. It's whether the local.
That's the
state will
diversions
need-
from other places?
No, actually, these were.
Internal.
These were part of the 40 bodies that we received in fiscal year 19 that we've helped put over there.
Okay. And then, let's see, going back to kind of my appropriation rider set of questions, there's one that I think is appropriate for you, which is a rider requiring the destruction of records of background checks through which the buyers are approved within 24 hours of approval. And so then, is that correct? As a matter of,
Sorry, can you repeat that? A rider,
background checks have to be destroyed
if they're
within
preceded.
20, pardon?
If they're preceded.
Right, within 24 hours, okay. Do you have any concerns with that? And the scenario that sometimes I think about, and others do as well, is, okay, fine, the background check is destroyed, you've got a concern over a particular person, and you want to know whether that person has actually purchased any firearms within recent history. Is the destruction of that background check a hindrance from knowing that?
So we're just following the legislation as it's.
I understand, but I'm asking you whether you think the legislation should be continued as an appropriations rider or otherwise, from your perspective, on adequately figuring out whether somebody is at risk.
Yeah, I think that's a discussion we have to have further about it with also our other agency partners, because it's not just an impact on the FBI, it's an impact on all the partners if that was changed.
Do you have a view on that?
So I'm going to defer to the FBI. I mean,
Wait a
it's
minute, you
the-
can't both refer to each other.
It's like,
I'm sorry, somebody has to answer the question.
yes, I feel what you're saying is, you know, this is the law, that we follow it and so forth, but the general theme is, if you have more time and access to information, can that be for making better decisions or leading to investigations?
Well, just having information that is no longer available that may be relevant in a particular situation, that's what I'm concerned about.
Yes, sir, and that's where I would think that would be a healthy discussion for all of you. I will just say that I know when I make a decision, when I have proper information and I have enough time, I usually make better decisions.
Okay. And then, Mr. Brandon, I'm going back to my original question on the appropriations riders that I think are in your bailiwick. So I've got a couple here that have been accumulated over recent years. Again, these are riders that you are functioning under right now. One does not require gun dealer physical inventories, as I understand it. Another hinders or else disallows you from working with other federal agencies in certain areas. One does not allow you to create searchable databases of records. And I think the third one, I think you may be talking about, which is not pursuing multiple gun traces to look for patterns. Are you familiar with all of those restrictions, and do you have a view as to whether any of them should be repealed?
Hey, sir, if you could just start with you rattled off, what was the first one?
Okay, I've got the first one says no requirement of physical inventories for gun dealers.
Sir, like I said, that's, like you said, it's an appropriation restriction, becomes like law, we abide by it. I just share that, you know, hey, people are operating legitimate businesses, and if you're operating a business, do the standard business maintain an inventory? That would be something I think that you all should discuss. Yeah.
Okay. The second one, as I understand it, I may not have the deals, restricts your ability to work with coordinate your efforts with other federal agencies. Are you familiar with that one?
No, sir, I think, are you talking about trace information?
I think trace is separate from this particular area. If I don't have adequate information, then
I don't know of anything that prohibits us from working with any law enforcement organization, state, federal, local, or tribal.
Okay, so let's then take the trace information restriction. Can you speak to that?
Sure, I think it's the TR Amendment, and it's referred to, and actually, we were a supporter of it because we were afraid of undercover investigations, and undercover agents in particular being jeopardized and hurt because that information could be subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. So we were actually, you know, the historical record on that is we support that. Now, we share, a trace comes in from the law enforcement agency, they get it. And what they do with it is their decision. We leave it up to them to make the proper decision who they share that with. But that's something that has been beneficial to prevent some long-term undercover investigations on gun trafficking and going after straw purchases that could have, and undercovers dealing with them, that could be compromised if it wasn't protected information.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brandon, you expressed unequivocally the point that ATF is underfunded, and you're not the first one on Capitol Hill to say that recently. The House Judiciary Committee held a hearing on H.R. 8 on February 6th of this year, and there were several witnesses who testified that ATF is not properly funded. In fact, one law enforcement witness said it was an open secret, quote unquote, in law enforcement that ATF is underfunded. I've read your testimony, and it is obvious to me that you're trying to take ATF in a new direction with respect particularly to technology and intelligence-based policing. In fact, you just mentioned internet investigations. This Congress is clearly motivated to address violent gun crime in this nation, and I want to make sure that as we pass common sense gun safety laws, we properly fund the agencies tasked with enforcing those laws. The question is, I'd like to hear from you, what could be done with another $25, $35, $45 million in your budget, and how would you prioritize use of those additional funds?
Thank you, sir, for the question. And like I mentioned, we have Rob Peter to pay Paul as far as the correlation center, and that's you hit the point from my statement. Myself and my team, we've really worked hard to say, where do we bring value? And this goes back to the Police Foundation did a report in 2016, actually for the new Trump administration coming in 2017. The number one thing that the major city chiefs wanted was NIBIN. The second thing was E-Trace. The last thing that they wanted was what we were doing were the surges or enhanced enforcement initiatives. And they want, you know, they don't want a flash in the pan. They want sustainability, and we knew that. And that's where we have pivoted as a team. So to accomplish those objectives, for instance, in 19, we couldn't buy any government cars for our employees. We had to cut, and when we delivered for the administration, as we should, because, again, they were being supportive. But we knew these $40 million in cuts in 2019 were not sustainable. Now we're going into 2020. And I don't want to be technical, but when the 19 budget was being formulated, the CR was still going on for 18. So they started with the number that was 20 million lower than what we got. And so we were already in the hole and digging out. So I'm not an alarmist by nature, and I'm fiscally conservative. But I wouldn't be doing my job speaking to you distinguished folks if I didn't rightfully say 18F needs to be funded. And I think it was Arte Acevedo, the Houston Police Chief and now the head of the major city chiefs that mentioned that, and you know, we're a good investment.
All right, thank you for that. And finally, I'm also concerned with a situation that occurred recently in Aurora, Illinois, in which a man killed several co-workers with a firearm that he, quote, legally purchased years earlier from a gun store. And I say, quote, legally, because that sale never should have happened based on the shooter's 1995 felony conviction in another state. Now, Illinois conducts their own background checks, and apparently they missed the conviction from the other state. In their query of the shooter's criminal history in 2014, the state even issued this man a firearm owner identification card prior to the sale, further demonstrating this flaw in the system. My question is, do either of you have any information regarding the number of times a person with an alternate permit or other state firearms purchase card successfully purchased a firearm when they would or should have failed a standard NICS background check or even a state-run background check?
Obviously a tragic situation that happened there, but we don't have the data right now. We'd have to go to each individual state and get that data and compile it for you. So
Okay, same answer?
Yes, sir, I know, hey, when he got picked up, it was because he went for a CCW permit to carry a gun, and it was the fingerprints that ID'd him. And I think what happened was it showed the state system, I think it was Mississippi. They didn't enter records for the FBI to be able to say to alert that.
Would it not make sense to require a state that issues an alternate permit periodically to update the record via a comprehensive background check? And if so, do you have any recommendations as to what the interval should be for those updates?
again, when we do the checks, right, the information's only as good as what's in the systems and what we have from the states. So we, again, work very hard to try to get them to update their information as we see it when we conduct audits in our system, when we feel that information needs to be updated. And so that's how we go about making the decisions with
Right,
checks.
it's one of those what should be questions.
The better and more accurate information we have, to the point of the more information you have and the more time you have to make the decisions, the better off the decision's going to be.
You agree, would it make sense to require updates like that?
Yes, sir. I know that we accept, and I think it's by law, that if someone has are updating that to make sure, should that person still have that, they could go in and get it done, and they wouldn't have to do the check.
So it makes sense to require updates. Do you have a recommendation on how often?
No, sir. I just think that anything that you all decide that tightens things up to make sure the proper people get the firearms and the ones that don't, I think is healthy for the country.
I thank you both. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, I'm late. I had other activities outside the building I had to take care of this morning. Let me say to Directors Brandon and Halverson, you both have such impressive backgrounds. Thank you for your service to our country. And I have to say to Director Brandon that I noted your work in Detroit and your degree from University in Michigan, Oakland, in Oakland. And these are areas just 20 minutes from my district in Toledo. So you've both had tremendous experience. My question really goes to, first of all, you have my support, and probably more support than you want. But I'm interested in patterns of criminal activity. Probably one of the most important books I've read is by Sam Quinones, Dreamland, because I was trying to understand the drug trade in much more depth. And generally, when something horrible happens, whether it's ISIS-related or whether it's a gang-related crime, there's a story in some newspaper somewhere in the country, and they report on that. But I'm interested in patterns of criminal activity. And so I want to ask you in two areas, if you could comment on this and anything additional I could do to help you collect the data and interpret it to guide us. Obviously, Northern Ohio is a big concern of mine. I represent it. And we have a lot of crime, a lot of gun activity. And I don't believe that some of it is just isolated. So first, in terms of major shootings in this country that have occurred going back, let's start with something like Virginia Polytechnic, where we lost a lot of innocent people and the perpetrator was mentally ill. Or we go to Sandy Hook, same thing. If I were to ask you to go back into your database and to string together the crimes that were major crimes like that and the gun, the weapon, is there a pattern we can follow that would tell us something, especially when they're mentally ill, what happened? Rather than just an incident or something like that, but is there something we can learn about where they got the weapon? Or what can this pattern of continuing murder across our country, what do you know maybe that hasn't been organized in a way to educate the public? So I'm very interested in mass murder and mental illness and guns. And I'm very interested, particularly for my region, in gang-related violence with guns and the drug trade. Ohio is unfortunately at the top of the list in terms of number of deaths per capita. So we have plenty of evidence of what these individuals are capable of doing. But it tends to be reported incident by incident by incident, and you don't get a sense of, well, where's most of it coming? Where did the gun come from, or guns come from? And who are these individuals connected to? Do you have any ability to create some order in our minds in either of these important areas, either gang-related crimes with guns or mental illness and guns going back, and help us understand the guns and where they came from, and how to? Do you have the ability to do that in your data system?
Well, I love the way you're thinking and where you're going with this, and you think big picture, and these are conversations we have all the time, especially on intelligence-driven organizations, on how do we address this, right? How do we address all the threats coming at us? So one of the things that the FBI has worked towards, so with the unified crime reporting system that we had for years, that was always summary-based reporting, meaning that a summary would be written on the crimes in 9 categories, and it would just not have really a geographical or any breakdown of what types of crime. The other problem with the unified crime reporting was if it was an assault with a break-in and a trespass, right, the highest crime there would be the only one that would be reported. You wouldn't get both. So you wouldn't know that a robbery actually caused the assault or the assault caused a robbery. You had no idea. So now we've gone to the National Incident-Based Reporting, the NIBR system, and we're now with the NIBR system, which we're still working through, and by 2021, January 1st of 2021, where all our local and state partners are going to be contributing into the NIBR system, we hope. We're working with them right now. And yep, and we're working with all. We're working with every single state. Every single state is reporting into NIBR. We're working with them to report into NIBR. Some are further along in the process than others, but NIBR's is incident by incident. And what we've seen is that the law enforcement agencies that have been able to come on board sooner into that system are now able to reallocate their resources much more quickly to the areas of violence that are occurring because they have the incident breakdown. And we've actually created a web interface. Before they had to wait till we issued the report. Now every day they can go in on the statistics they're reporting and actually use it as a tool themselves every single day and run their statistics every single day. Could even use it at roll call to determine where they're going to allocate their resources that day. So what we've seen is it's been very, very instrumental to strategically going after the threat instead of waiting for the summary report to come out, twice a year or once a year.
Each member, we know our districts, and it would be very interesting to the extent you can help us unwind what's going on there. We're not asking for confidential information, but right now it's so diffuse. I ask myself as a member, how can I help my local sheriffs? How can I help the local chiefs of police? What can we possibly do? And with the young people with these guns, I'm saying to myself, how does all this get in here? And I don't have a clear path because right now, so it'll take till 2021. I hope I'm still here. I am concerned about the lack of focus, and maybe it's just held by law enforcement officials and we're not allowed to know all that, but I just don't feel we're doing enough, certainly in the mental illness area. You never read a story where you go back 20 years, starting with when Russell Weston came into the Capitol here and killed 2 of our police officers and tried to get in the majority leader's office and all that. And it's like a story, and then it fades. But what if you piece together all of them? What is it telling us? I think there's something there. There's a bigger message that we need to understand, and I don't think we have it.
So I would absolutely invite you to come out to Sages to sit down with our folks to gather the crime statistic data and let them walk you through the process of how they do that and the relationships we have with our law enforcement partners and how they use that information, and also to walk you through the intelligence, how we use intel to drive those operations as well.
I listen to Mr. Brandon, Mr. Chairman. Might I have an additional 30 seconds to listen to his reply? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, I have a specific answer to your question. It's our crime gun intelligence centers. We've established these, and exactly what you're asking for, that's what we've drilled down on. What Mr. Cartwright observed is we're using technology and intelligence and working collaboratively with our law enforcement partners to go after the trigger pullers, who's pulling the trigger, and who's supplying that trigger puller with the firearm. We call them a trafficker. So it's the 2 T's, the trigger pull and the trafficker. Our crime gun intelligence centers have been uniquely designed to answer your question. We'd be happy to give you, with respect to time, a separate presentation. We invite all you down to our correlation center in Huntsville, Alabama. But exactly what you're asking, we've been working at.
I have to go to Huntsville to find this?
No, we'll come to you for whatever, but hey, what's wrong with it? But I share that, ma'am, because that's where we're providing a service to the police departments, I believe, in your jurisdiction that can get that correlation service, because, as you know, you go into whole neighborhoods and you say, hey, we're going to target it. You tick a lot of people off, innocent people that may be just living there because of that's where they live. Instead of going, who's the one really doing all what you're asking? Who's shooting people, and how are they getting the guns? That's what we're solving in Crime Gun Intelligence Centers. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me have that time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to apologize, too. I had a conflicting committee meeting and apologize for running late. Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you, Ms. Halverson, for being here, and Mr. Brandon. Appreciate your presence today and what you do and your service to our country. My home state of Florida has been devastated in recent years by gun violence and mass shootings. In both the Pulse nightclub and Parkland High School mass shootings, neighbors and coworkers were warned the FBI. The Pulse shooter was openly sympathizing with terrorists at work. His coworkers called the FBI tip line. The FBI opened an investigation and put a tail on the individual, but nothing came of it. Then he legally bought a weapon and used it to kill 49 people and wounding 51 more, many critically. For them and for our state, particularly in the Pulse situation, the LGBT community and the Latin community, the wounds will never heal. There were multiple warnings about the Parkland shooter. His YouTube comment about becoming a school shooter was reported to a local FBI field office. 1 month before the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, a young woman who knew the shooter called the FBI tip line and for the next 14 minutes provided specific details about the shooter. Talking about animal mutilation, severe temper, violent threats, stockpiling weapons, social media, all in a transcript. He killed 17 people 6 weeks later, including 14 high schoolers. The Stoneman Douglas kids changed this country. They demanded that we put the lives of our children, the lives of their friends and loved ones first. They shouldn't have had to be, because Parkland never should have happened. With both Pulse and Parkland, the FBI was alerted. In both cases, that didn't stop it. What exactly went wrong? And I want to know the failures that occurred in the Bureau, how your policies and procedures have changed, and where the failures in our laws gave these two monsters access to weapons of war, and what this committee can do to support you to make sure these kinds of things don't happen again. Please.
So, very tragic events, and yeah, in my 23 years, I actually worked gangs in New York before I came to headquarters, and so saw a lot of this, right, throughout my whole entire career, and then worked counterterrorism right after 9/11 as well. So I've seen a lot of this. So my hearts go out to the families, and having been on the other side of having to tell families and victims and working through all that, right? And so we continue to work with the Parkland families, and it's the men and women who work in CJIS who answer those calls. I gave statistics earlier. They handle 655,000 calls last year and 755,000 e-tips that come in. Not every call is a threat to life, right? But they have to go through each call to figure out if it's a threat to life. We've changed all our procedures since Parkland to work through that. They've gotten enhanced training. They get threat briefings now. They get briefings on how to handle potential school shootings. They have gotten new standard operating procedures that they're operating by. We have more supervisory review. We have implemented new procedures in the chain of approvals and how to get through those approvals. We have technology enhancements that have come to get the information to their fingertips a lot quicker. And we're actually working with our field offices to get the information out to the field offices very quickly, and have implemented procedures on top of the field offices on how they're handling those threats that are coming to the field offices, to work with our partners and to work with our fusion centers as well to get the information in the action officer's hand. And that's why in my opening statement, I don't talk about an FBI agent, who gets the information. It's an action officer who can action that information very quickly that we're working towards. So we've put all those procedures in place and continue to work and modifying our processes as the threats happen. We don't want any of these to happen anymore either. This is what we worked so hard for. This is why we joined the organizations we did, to keep the public safe, right? Every time, something like this happens, it kills us inside as well, and we strive harder and harder to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Is there a specific goal or amount that you would like this committee to help provide you in order to further prevent these things from happening?
Yeah.
Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I think what I would love, and it goes to the question that you posed, I really would love for you to come out to CJIS and sit with these people who are taking these calls every day and going through that, to see really what they're dealing with on a daily basis and how they're going through it, so you have that education. I've been out there now for 2 months as acting assistant director. I've been in the Bureau 23 years. It's my first experience out there. I knew they did great work, but they do amazing work every day. As a matter of fact, just this weekend, we actually referred a threat to life issue to our Los Angeles Field Division. Within an hour time frame of receiving it, it was an individual who was making threats online. They quickly identified through getting a 2703D order who that individual was online. And then they went out to the house, and that person had mental illness issues, was off their meds, right? And they were able to stop this person from committing violence before it even happened, and was able to work with the family to get this person the treatment that they needed. They're doing things like that every day. And so it would be great for you to come out and see them and the work that they're doing, and the changes that we've made and where we're going. And especially from your constituency, coming out there and saying, well, this really doesn't work because this is what they've told me. It would be great to get your feedback as well on the work that we're doing out there as well.
Thank you very much. And just briefly, Mr. Brandon, you're at ATF. How would you describe the primary mission of your agency?
Sir, we are guns. It's about 82% of our budget as far as between enforcing the federal firearms laws. We also, I guess, a catchy phrase, bang, boom, and burn, where it's, most people don't realize that we're involved in arson investigations. We have the Federal Fire Research Laboratory, the only asset in the federal government. And as far as, and we support our federal, state, and local partners and tribal partners with that. But our main mission is violent crime. Particularly violent crime related to firearms, or criminal acts of arsons, or criminal bombings. Obviously, whenever I say the T word, our role is to be no better partner to the FBI dealing with terrorism. And I think that the ATF and FBI have made strong progress in having great working relationships that benefit the American people. It's public first.
Yes, sir. So is it safe to say then, to summarize, that it's your mission to primarily prevent violent crime by the usage of guns?
That would be our primary mission, so yes.
How much money do you need more to do that? And then I'm done.
About $60 million.
Great. Did the president recommend that?
Sir, I don't know, and I salute to the administration. I'm here testifying under oath and being honest. Like I said, you cut fat. We used to say we're cutting into muscle, we're cutting into bone. That's the truth with ATF.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
couple more questions. First of all, I admit the guilt of having tried to invent a new word. The word is undetermined, but that has actually brought us to yet another dilemma we have, is that we still don't know what transfer undetermined means. Does it mean the fact of the transfer, or does it mean eligibility of the purchaser? I mean, what does transfer undetermined mean? We don't want to leave this hearing not knowing what that means.
So just from the FBI's perspective on that question, when we have a delay queue disposition come back and then we're able to make the determination that that person should have been a deny, and then we refer it over to ATF. If it's after that 3-day time window from the 4 to 30 days, they had the ability to purchase a weapon during those 4 to 30 days. At day 31, they have to come back in and reapply. Okay, so from the 31 to 88 days. In that 4 to 30 days, when we refer it over to ATF, we don't know if they've gotten a weapon or not. We can't tell if the sale occurred or not. So in that 6,000, it's not that all 6,000 got weapons. They just had the ability to get weapons, and to the point of some of our partners working with some of the big gun sellers, they will not sell if you're still in that delay queue, right? So some of those 6,000 may not have been people who fully got weapons.
Sir, on delayed denials, we don't leave anything undetermined. If it comes from the FBI and it looks like they have gotten a firearm, we track it by month. I get briefed monthly with my executive team, and there has to be a resolution. Oftentimes, there can be problems with obtaining the court documents, which frustrates the FBI, rightfully so. And even with us having more time than 3 business days, we can say, hey, 30 days, 60 days, we're still trying to retrieve these records, but we don't leave anything undetermined, and that's tracked monthly and briefed up to me.
Previous ATF reports have indicated that nearly 60% of guns used in crimes can be associated with only 1% of federally licensed firearm dealers. Do you think that the ratio is still accurate? Does the ATF know who the troublesome gun dealers are? And what does the ATF do to make sure that these dealers are subject to additional oversight and enforcement?
Sir, it's a great question, and as I mentioned earlier, we have continuous process improvement. This is one of the areas that we can improve. In fact, just 3 weeks ago or so, I was briefed on how we're going to have better oversight at the national level. To say, the division may say these are our problematic federal firearms licensees that we need to inspect. And I don't know if you're familiar with the term CompStat. It started at NYPD, but it's using data to question people's decisions and modeling. And so we're using a new computer product with analytics to question these assumptions. And from, I really think it's going to take even ATF at a more precise way of going after, to what you're saying, these, you know, the dealers that are really not following the law and making and diverting lawful commerce into the black market where they become crime guns.
One last question, and it's almost a fun question, except that it isn't. It's a very sad question, a new threat. The whole issue of 3D printed guns. What kind of a threat do you see? And what should law enforcement and Congress consider doing to address the threat?
Sir, I know I dealt with this a few years ago. It was the Undetectable Firearms Act that was renewed. And it was, I think it was called the Liberator firearm, piece of plastic, 3D printed, but you have to be compliant with the law, have a piece of metal that can be detected through like a TSA security machine walking through. The threat we didn't see is maybe gang members, you know, doing this, but the threat to, you know, public officials, or, you know, for any type of assassinations that you would be undetected and reassembled and so forth. What we see are self-made, unserialized firearms, which are legal to do. It's not illegal to make your own firearm and not serialize it as long as you're not in the business of selling guns. I had a briefing where our divisions in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Miami are seeing an uptick in this, in particular with gang members. One of these self-made, unserialized firearms was used in a school community college shooting a few years ago. And so they're not necessarily 3D printing, but going to these legal way of, and this person, I believe, was prohibited, so he made his own gun, which the part he bought is not regulated, and they can make some minor modifications now and then get unregulated parts like the barrel, the upper receiver, assemble it, and that's a threat to public safety. That's something we're looking at.
I suspect it's one we're going to be looking at a lot because it's available to a lot of people, and it creates yet another problem for all of us to deal with.
Sure, I mean, you have people saying you have hobbyists that are legitimately, you know, I mean, I like guns, and they're hobbyists that like making their own guns, but it also opens it up for people that are prohibited, that aren't going to go in and to an FFL and go through an FBI background check, NICS check, and then say, hey, get this, 3 holes through it, get these parts, slap it, I got my own gun, nobody knows the difference. And we have a number of shootings that they're involved in.
Thank you. Mr. Adderhold? Chapter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. I wanted to go back to my question about mental illness and guns. For the most recent year for which you correct figures, how many fatalities have there been in our country due to shootings with guns? 60,000, I think you probably have that number.
I don't have that number on hand.
Because I'm going to ask you if you could go back and get that number, and also then, of that percentage, how many of those were due to an individual with a weapon who was mentally ill? Do you have the ability in your data set to identify that or not?
No, we don't.
How sad is that? I want to just say this because I'm going to ask you to work with your colleagues in other branches of the government. I'll go through this, and I'm looking for a report. I don't know who to go to for the report, but you're a good place to start. If I go back to when Officers Gibson and Chestnut were shot here in 1998, both Chairman Serrano and I were present during that horrible incident. That was 1998. That perpetrator was a schizophrenic and had traveled all the way across the country looking for a purple light here in the Capitol. A few years later, in Virginia, at Virginia Polytechnic, we had a mass shooting, and the perpetrator was a paranoid schizophrenic. One of our dearest colleagues, Gabby Gifford, was shot here, shot in her home community in 2011. The same thing with her perpetrator. And each of these incidents happens in an isolated way, which I go back to my original line of questioning. Is there any way you can work with your colleagues across the establishment of the federal government to look at the numbers of how many people die from these crimes annually? Some are domestic violence. That may be one of the highest categories. But the mental illness issue is not tangential. There are many crimes where people, we are not going to solve this problem until we look it right in the face. Every sheriff I represent across northern Ohio, half the people in their jails are mentally ill. And most of them spent time in juvenile detention facilities as kids, and they merely graduated to the adult institution as adults. So we are holding this population through deinstitutionalization that they said didn't work back in the 80s. Everybody was released. And now we've got sick people at the juvenile level who are filling our juvenile detention facilities, and then they just graduate and they go in the adult facility. So this is how we're handling mental illness as a country. So the people, the casualties that are resulting from these individuals, Sandy Hook was another one, right? We're all shocked, and we all go home. And I'm saying to myself that I think the data can really help us if we could assemble that. And I'm very interested in where they got the gun. We know the Sandy Hook perpetrator got it from his mother. She was taking him to a shooting range, and he was not stable. Oh, my goodness. So we have really work to do in this country, but I'm asking, do you have the ability in your own agencies or with your colleagues across the federal government to go back to 1998, start with the shooting right here? Where did Russell Weston get his gun? Is that on the record somewhere? And what his diagnosis was, and then deal with the people over at NIMH and figure out what happened? How did this guy get through the net? And do the same with these mass shootings across our country and enlighten the American people. I think that'd be a great contribution. Do you have the ability to participate in that type of effort? Or lead it?
Ma'am, one of the things, as I mentioned, when there's a mass shooting, you know, ATF, FBI, Marshal Service is going to respond. And we've all come up with our roles, which we're even defining under the Deputy Attorney General's leadership. The ATF mission is always follow the gun. We are going to learn to say, how did this person get the gun? Were any federal laws violated? Did anybody conspire to get this person the gun? And I do believe that the FBI and even the Secret Service do a study looking back at saying, what is the historical nature? I can tell you anecdotally, and my chief of staff is here, when I hear of these shootings, and I don't say this, but it's just been at a while, I said, I bet you the person purchased it in the last 3 to 4 months. They're not prohibited, but they got mental illness. And I've been pretty good at just doing it. So if I'm picking that up, just going, oh my God, there's another tragedy, you know. And you mentioned Newtown. Everybody knows where they were. It's like 9/11 tragedy when you hear about that. But the other thing I've learned from talking to folks is that people that have mental illness that aren't violent, you know, a lot of them. So there's really drilling down to which mental illness, because putting people with a broad brush can be, you know, unfair, because they could be victims of violence themselves. So I think that your question's well put, and also I think that ATF, the FBI, I testified with a Secret Service representative, she was PhD, that would look into trends in shootings and so forth like that. So it's something that I think there's information there that can answer your question that the FBI can get back to you.
I would really be grateful, and we'll put some,
Thanks.
try to put some language in a report. Try to put some language in to get that wouldn't that interest my other colleagues on this committee, on this subcommittee? And I'm not saying, I know the mental illness community resists this because they don't want to view the mentally ill as largely violent, and they aren't. But there is a subset, and it's like, what do we do as a country to identify this possibility and avoid these casualties?
I mean, this is a very, very complex problem, and it is something that's going to need a whole government approach going forward on it. So I appreciate you offering that up and following up with us on that. And I will tell you, on the JTTFs, the national JTTFs, we've been working very hard with Health and Human Services to get a task force officer that's from Health and Human Services on the JTTFs, even if they're part-time. So that what we do is, when we're going through our counterterrorism cases, we actually review it through them if we think there may be some mental illness involved, and how do we work through the process around that person, right? And how do we handle that case? Do we have other tools in the toolbox, right, that we can actually help instead of putting them in prison? Or are there other things we can do to get them help? And they're the subject matter experts on it. We're not, right? As law enforcement, we're not mental health professionals. They are. And so we're working with that on our counterterrorism investigations, and I know they're trying to work through that on some of our criminal investigations as well. But it's a step in the right direction, but it has to be a whole government approach moving forward on this.
You both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Joining us today. It's been very informative, and we're on your side. We know the work you need to do. We want you to do more of it. We want you to have an opportunity to do it better, as I'm sure you want to improve on it. And as time goes on, as we get this bill ready, we will keep that in mind, and our conversations will continue. So thank you so much, and this meeting is adjourned.